I'll be talking about Monday's lecture and specifically the underdog, why people root for the underdog, do people actually want the underdog to win, and what's the economics behind that. So first of all, I feel like people usually root for the underdog because seeing them win and having a huge upset would just be more satisfying. But some economics literature behind that could be like prospect theory, which was developed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, which was basically the idea that people don't just decide. They don't make decisions just based on expected outcome, rather, instead based on the perceived gains and losses relative to the current situation. And we also tend to feel losses more heavily than wins, and so because of all that, people tend to overweight low probability events and underweight high probability events. And in this context, people just decide to root for the underdog because they believe that they'll get more joy, excitement, happiness, whatever. Basically, like they feel that they'll get more emotional utility out of that win. Um, than they would rooting for the other team that's just expected to win. And then, do people actually want the underdog to win? Well, I personally really do. There are various reasons we talked about in class as to why people don't. For one, people want to see the best of the best. Even though it's great that like a loser, quote unquote, finally wins, that means that games and the overall league will probably become less competitive. And maybe that win was just like a one-time thing, whatever it is. No one wants to see a team that's been awful and an underdog make it to like their Super Bowl, for example, because likely they're not actually the best of the best, and it's not as entertaining to watch like a blowout happen. And some actual economics to back that up is this paper called The Competitive Balance and Attendance, a Case of a Major League Baseball by Martin Schmidt and David Berry. And it basically looks at the MLB in the 1990s. First, whether the competitive balance in the MLB had worsened during that decade, and second, the relationship between league attendance and competitive balance. So we found that initially there's a negative response in attendance from short-term improvements in competitive balance, but in the long term, people do have positive reactions to that. So basically, people prefer over the long term increasing competitiveness rather than short term fluctuations. And this is based on attendance, and people don't always want. So this is based on attendance, which shows that like people might not actually always want the underdog to win because it would mean competitiveness is lowered. But something I would have liked to say in class is about why some people might genuinely root for the underdog. I think one thing that's changing in sports is kind of like the parasocial relationships between fans and teams and players, and a parasocial relationship is basically a one-sided relationship where one person is like super invested and the other person just doesn't know that the other person exists. And this happens a lot with celebrities, which I feel athletes are becoming more and more like. So social media, for example, athletes creating personal podcasts, team social media is doing like more fun and trendy stuff with their social medias, like challenges and questions and stuff. It makes like players seem more accessible and closer to fans. And so I think people will obviously still have their team, but I think more and more people know about and care about individual players that might be on other teams. And I think that might mean that like sometimes they will root for the underdog just because they have a player that they really love and they feel like they really connect to. And honestly, I feel like it could also be the opposite, where people grow a deep hate for certain players because of their presence on social media. For example, like Patrick Mahomes isn't really liked because people say his wife is problematic, like especially with some of her posts, some of the things she's done, and his brother also has sexual assault allegations. So like the way that the media has spread, I guess like the bad side of Patrick Mahomes has made him like so hated. So it's not as much that people don't like him because of like how he plays or like that they're jealous of him. I think a lot of it is that there's a lot of amplified hate for him, and the media has like changed that and how people view him. And that's it.